This is a tutorial for a architectural workflow working between Illustrator and Photoshop, and some of the basics that really will help you along the way to make really nice floor plans. In File, New, Tabloid, and Horizontal View, and create that as a new sheet. Now I'm going to hop over to Illustrator, so open, and I'll also do Create New, Print, Tabloid, Horizontal. And that's going to make sure that when you're working between these two artboards that you have the same dimensions and nothing is going to happen weird in terms of scaling. Then open up, we're going to be working on this doghouse floor plan. Already open in a new page. And so I already have this open, but this is also on 11 by 17, and this is my line work I have here. You'll notice that I have just made a black layer because for this tutorial, I'm planning on making my line work white, and so I just want to see it. So once you have that line work in there, I'm going to go File, Save, File, Save, go back to the Photoshop file and type in File, Place Linked. And then you'll see here, I'll have that file. And this is the important thing to really keep in mind here, is that there is this bounding box. That's not what you want. You want the media box. And that will make sure if you have that 11 by 17, it's going to place it in the same area. So I'll click that. I'll highlight that. And now I have my line work in Photoshop. I can't see it because it's white. Really what you need is this layers panel open and pretty much doing everything within this panel. And so you'll see here it says create new group. So I'll create a new group and I'll just title this base layer. And then I can move the doghouse and that way I can turn it off and on. So let's say I want to make a black background. I would come down here and I would hit this button here and then hit solid color, and then I can choose whatever color I want. For instance, if I want to make this a different color inside here, how would we go about doing that? We'll just let's create a new group, bring in a new color. So let's just give it let's do a color. I'm just doing a random color, for example, now. And then we're going to use something which is called the masking tool. And what the masking tool does is it eliminates the area that it keeps the area that you have selected and eliminates everything else. So let's take a look at the masking tool. So for that, I would create a rectangle around here and then select this floor plan. And I would actually select not the color itself, but the whole folder, and then hit the masking tool. And it will mask whatever is in that selection. If the selection is not correct, you can always come back here and let's say we want to go inside the lines. I could redraw this selection. And then I would come up here and hit select inverse. So select inverse. Come back and now I'll hit B, which is for the brush tool. So you can come over here. This is the brush tool, but I'm just going to hit B. And you'll notice there's this white and black here. Make sure that the opacity is 100, flow is 100. And you're going to want to actually turn this to black. And what that will do, you're essentially masking out. So whatever is black is whatever is black is acting as a mask, as a way to hide all that information. And so you can paint that on. Okay, so for this, we're just gonna have a light thing. And so for instance, if I had inner walls, I would come back here, maybe just turn this off for a second, and I would have to probably come to my base layer and select the white part, and then come up to this and make sure that I have this mask selection on, and come back. And again, because I don't want it seen, I'm going to make it black. Mask it out. So that's how the masking works. And let's say I want to give this floor plan a little bit of shadow and a little bit of depth. So in order to do that, and also this is probably really intense, so I'll just give this a lot of transparency just to, you need to make sure to distinguish the inside from the outside, but it doesn't need to be too overwhelming. You can do it pretty subtly. So now I'm going to make a new group for this shadow layer. And for the shadow layer, I'll also select and make a new layer here. And I'll again press the B button, go to black, and I'll make sure I have something nice and blurred out. And let's just pretend like the sun is coming from, here, let's just change this color. Let's pretend the sun is coming from this direction, which would mean that you would cast shadows like so. Maybe even on the inside, you would cast shadows on the inside. Okay, so just to keep that in mind, okay, we're always going to think of the sun coming from this direction here. All right, so I'm going to go back to the black and very loosely, you know, you can come and be really super precise about this, but for this exercise, that's not necessarily necessary. And I'll show you how we're going to kind of go about doing this. All right, so I've made these series. We can even make it white so we can kind of see what we've done, what we haven't done. Now I'm going to go back and use, again, this mask tool and come out, and I've masked it without selecting anything. And then I'll just draw on top of it. And then for this time, I'll make it smaller. And a good thing to know is you can, if you hit Alt and the right click, then you can change the size of the brush. So, and then if you hit once and then hit again, you'll hit Shift and it will, so instead of dragging it, if you hit Shift, it will delete everything. So just good to keep in mind for navigating how to do this. Then I'm going to come here and just give it a ton of opacity, or even hit multiply, and then just give it some opacity. And that, you know, it's subtle, but it helps it pop. Now we're going to add some texture, and this part is highly interpretive. It really depends on, you know, what is your goal, what is your design intent, what type of mood are you going for. I've tons of different textures here. Just make sure that it's of high quality and that you're not blowing this image up too much. So like there, you can see, okay, it's not gonna mess things up too much. And I'm gonna put that on its own folder. And I'm probably gonna drop this below the base layer because I don't want to mess with my line work here. Okay. And then let's find one more texture tab. All right, so right now the textures are way too intense and you need to be really careful. You need to use textures very intentionally and really make sure that they're not popping out of the page. And so the first thing I'm gonna do is, you'll notice up here, I have these various blending modes. These are called blending modes. And what that does is it will essentially reference all the layers below it, and it will blend those in different ways. And so a lot of times I have both these textures and I'll type on this normal. Now I can just scroll down through these blending modes until something comes up. And this is kind of part of the discovery. Select this one. I'm like, well, this one's kind of cool. There's like, you know, or maybe something like that. You know, it kind of depends on what mood you're going for. So I kind of liked this one, was kind of cool. But again, the texture is way too intense. And so I'd come here and select the whole group, and I should title this texture. And then I don't want that. I don't want that. Just want that white background. And I'll make this really light. And then, okay, maybe we need to make this dark background. And again, if I want it, I can change that grayness. This is the opacity, so if you're like, well, that's a little too dark, you can kind of fiddle with how you want these to come up. But the most important thing is you really want it to not be too intense. And so I'll make this more gray and then fade out these textures. And then along with the textures, what's nice to do is come up here and essentially want to go filter gallery. And these are a series of filters you can apply to your actual textures themselves. So one that works really well is maybe something like a mosaic tile. And I might actually bring the scale up a lot. Maybe make the relief more. I think the scale needs to come up more. And you can just kind of go through these and see if there's one that you like. But the idea is to give a little bit of a paper texture. And you could probably just do the same. Another thing I like to do is do convert to for smart filters. And what that allows is for you to always go back and adjust and change your filters. So I've converted it, filter, convert to smart filters. Now you see I didn't use smart filters on this one. I did use it on this one. I can always turn off and on that smart filter and see if it's actually doing anything for me. It might not be because it's so light of a texture. So I could even go as low as 5% or even 2% here. Oh, that's probably 3. And then say like, well, I'm still not really happy with how these textures are coming out. You can just go back to your, find a texture that you like, go back to your plan. Maybe I need to make a new folder, like a texture 2 or something if I want different opacities, or you can adjust your opacities per layer too. And I'm doing Control T in order to do that. And then we kind of said the sun was coming from this direction. So, maybe roughly I would have something that goes from light to dark. Hit that. And again, this is super saturated, very distracting to your actual architecture. And so again, I would want to find a filter that would be appropriate. So I could come up here and just, this is where you have a little bit of fun with it. Maybe a brush stroke. And you notice I didn't actually select, oh no, I did. Filter gallery. I guess it just didn't load it for some reason. There we go. I want to do a brush stroke because I kind of want to keep that angle going this way. Let's see, distance, scale. Or sprayed strokes might be good. Right diagonal, and then just give that a lot. There's other types of filters you can add that might be helpful. For instance, the different types of blur tools. So let's take a quick look at that. So let's see, is there any difference? Sometimes they do a lot, and sometimes not so much. But you could also come up here and do a Gaussian blur that kind of just overall does a blur. For this one, I kind of want to do a motion blur. And then just kind of decide like what's going to keep the texture, some texture and depth, but make sure that the resolution's not too clear actually, and make it more of like almost like a hatch. Okay, let's see how that's going to look. And then I'll go again through this and just toggle through this until if something comes up, and something might not, or it might come up. You never know. These are kind of cool. Maybe it's something more black and white. I think we need to up these for now just to kind of see how these two are going to interact. So something like that might be kind of nice, going from light to dark. Maybe we'll keep that. What was that? That was color dodge, linear dodge. That's pretty intense. You know, maybe you find one in here that's really cool. So yeah, either this one's kind of nice, or this linear dodge. And then again, I would come back and really tone down, really just tone this thing down. I might say, well, I like the light, but the color is a little distracting. So what you could do if you want that, to adjust that, I would come in, and these are all the different types of additional filters you can add on top of layers. So brightness and contrast, hue and saturation. So if I wanted to saturate this a little bit and said, oh, that's a lot of color, what I would do is I would add the hue and saturation and then hit Alt. Okay, select the layer, hit hue and saturation, hit Alt until there's this thing that's pointing to the bottom. And what that does is it makes sure that it only happens to that one layer. And then we'll just give this, let's for right now give it no color because it was kind of color intense. And then again, I would go back and say, well, no, I really want less. Let's just do 5 of that. And then really, you know, just a little bit of that. So we could keep that for now. When I did this other test, you know, a similar technique, I used this watercolor texture and then did a pin light. And so you'll see how much that changes just having those two textures. And that again was just scrolling through this and finding a different type of texture. It depends on what type of mood you're going for. And then you notice it sort of goes from one color to a next. That's because for this one, I added a gradient. So when we go back to our file, we could also, towards the end, we could come up here and add a gradient. And let's say we're still going from our light source. Let's say we don't want a color gradient yet. You could cancel. You could create a gradient to really reinforce that color that you're going for, or the light that you're going for, something like that. So it could go something like that and make sure it's not in the folder. And then again, you would just cycle through these until you find something that pops or that works out, and then just reduce the opacity. Again, you don't want to do anything too intense or that's going to be too distracting. Really what you're going for is just adding some depth and texture to the image. So we'll continue on this, and I really wanted a more of a paper texture than we have so far. And so I'm gonna just create a solid color, give it like an off-white-ish gray, and then go filter gallery, whatever. We don't need to do a smart filter. Filter gallery, convert to smart object, and do like a texturizer. And this would just give us that paper texture. You could do sandstone, it's also nice. Canvas, brick, burlap. There's all, you know, might as well think the sandstone's actually kind of nice. So again, this just gives it a little bit of a blur. It gives it a little bit of texture and a little bit of depth. And then again, I would come in here and then just, you know, it changes how you would see the image. And so if this would now be a little bit too gray, I could come down here and adjust this layer how I wanted to. So, and then again with this color texture, I could also come through here and try different types of blending techniques. A lot of the times when I'm testing out blending techniques, I like to go through with 100% opacity. So that one kind of comes through nicely. Let's see, and I'm using the up and down arrow to scroll through these. So that one kind of came through nicely, and then I would just, yeah, turn it down. All right, so let's quickly add some trees. A couple ways you could do that. You could just do circles. In this case, we're going to add some watercolor trees, mainly because I have them here. Watercolor. So let's say I took a watercolor tree. You could do line work. It doesn't really matter. And I'm again hit W line to use the wand tool, and then just delete that white space. Another thing I could do is W and select some of that white space, and then go up select similar, and then delete it again. There you go. Now it's like so. I'm going to select all of this and then come up back to our drawing. And again, when I'm looking at this and like, this is, you're not trying to, actually before I scale this, I do want to convert this to a smart object. And what that does is it makes sure it preserves the information. Convert to smart object. And generally speaking, you don't want to, when you have an image, just, you don't want to blow it up too much because then it will start to get pixelated. So you just have to be curious. But you'll notice that this really stands out. And there's just a lot of color and you don't need that. So what you could do is, again, I would come here and hit the hue and saturation and apply that, apply that to that layer only. And I also want to make a folder that is called trees. And then make sure that it's just applied to this layer. I have my tree. Now I can highlight this, and then you'll see that, oh, you can also add adjustments here. But if I double click this, then it comes up here, and then I can adjust just that layer and give it some lightness, whatever I like there. Okay, so that's one of my trees. And again, you could you could go through these various filters until you find something you like maybe, this linear burn has lots of different, just black and white shadows that might look really nice. So let's try just scrolling through this one more time. I think I like that one. That one's nice. That one's nice too. So we could do that. And then again, like I would just give it some, maybe we'll do the other one actually, like this black one now, give that a little bit of transparency. And what's cool is you can always come up here and say, well, it's a little bit too light. What did I do for the first one? Oh, we made this like white on top of this. So it's up to you. Let's see. Yeah, just do normal for these. Curious for these trees, I think. Just want to check. Divide is what we used. Okay. So go back to my tree layer. Trees. Let's try that divide again. That seemed to work pretty well. Oops. And again, if this is coming up a little bit weird, I can always come here and adjust it. Okay. Let's just, whoops, that was my color fill. I want my trees was a little too opaque. So you'll see I've been placing this auto click. Sometimes it's easier just to not have auto click, and then you just don't get into trouble. So if I wanted to do a row of trees, I would hit Alt select and drag. Alt select drag. And then, you kind of want to vary them a little bit. So just select these various trees and just make them bigger or smaller depending on what you want to do. And then let's do a shadow layer for the trees. Shadow trees. And again, it's a similar technique here. I would hit the brush B, and then just make really quick, like this is just some shadows. And then I would make a mask layer and come in here and then just like go like that. And that's just going to make a big difference. And let's say I went a little bit overboard here. Just kind of come back and, whoops. Another thing you could do, so the smaller trees would have less of a shadow. So just kind of keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be perfect. But another thing that you could do is the smaller trees, if they're smaller, are these on the same layer? No, they're not. So like for some of the smaller tree, maybe I would change the opacity. And that's another way that I could start giving depth, which is really what we're going after. And then again, for the shadow layer, I'm just going to, bring this down so that you can't notice it, but if it was gone, you would notice the difference. So again, these are just these subtleties. So so far this is pretty good. I could add a subtle gradient to give it a little bit of a spark. Another thing I could do is line work is really nice. And so I might just come back here and just add some construction lines, or maybe even some site work, just to add to the layers that are here. So I'll do like a 0.75. I jump back into Illustrator. I'm going to do these like construction lines, and I'm hitting, if I hit Control Shift, if I drag and hit Control, it will duplicate. So that's how you can duplicate lines really quickly. So let's say there's a pathway. I'll just make like a pathway here. I'm hitting Shift so it, so it locks into place. Let's say there was like an additional pathway that came over here by our trees. Maybe it was like a pathway of trees or something. Hide this black layer and then do File, Save. And then again, it's just adding a very subtle layer. And you could say, well, first of all, my line weight's going over my trees. That's not good. Second of all, these lines are above these shadows and they're a little bit intense. And so I could just come here and select them, right click, arrange, send to back, and I'm going to make these a lot lighter, like 0.25, because they're really just construction lines. So they can be very light. And then I hit File, Save, and then I go back to my Illustrator file, but I have to hide my black layer. File, Save. There we go. It's a little bit better. And then if you say, well, these lines, I don't really like them, I don't want to go back to, you can always just go to that base layer. And then, yeah, we'll just mask over those some lines. I need to make sure I'm drawing on my actual thing. And again, this is just an additional way that you can start to add hierarchy and depth into your drawings. Confusing and complicated at first, but once you start doing it and getting used to the workflow, you'll see that there's just a ton of variability and flexibility and a lot of control that you can add into your image. And you can also just start to keep on layering information in there, and types of depth. And so you would notice like this path now, maybe I would want to extend this pathway. So then I would come in here and hit that and go and like extend this path. And then I would say, well, all my pathways are going to be this color that I've created. So that's just the first take of the Illustrator Photoshop workflow and opening it up and kind of getting oriented and how you can use Photoshop to your advantage.